Europe is in disarray as the prospect of a full-scale war on the continent becomes more and more likely. While other nations are panicking, one has taken the opportunity to arm up and ensure its sovereignty cannot be challenged by the looming Russian bear in the east. Let's look at this surprising dark horse in the current European arms race and how history is shaping its ongoing rapid militarization. On the first day of World War II, the German army surged across the borders of Poland with a blitzkrieg of infantry and armored cars. From the north, south, and west, the invaders came, aided by Slovak forces and its temporary ally, the Soviet Union. The Polish government was not prepared for the onslaught that was about to ravage their nation. There was no chance to negotiate with the Germans, who had made up their mind, so Poland quickly rallied its available defenses. In one skirmish, German infantry were caught off guard by a cavalry charge led by Colonel Kazimierz Masztalesz. Even with the advantage of modern firearms, the Germans couldn't fend off an entire Polish squadron on horseback. The invading infantry was forced to disperse, but before the cavalry could celebrate this minor victory, machine gun fire ripped through the air toward the riders and their horses. Alongside German reconnaissance vehicles, modern German tactics and technology decimated the Polish troops. Colonel Masztalesz was killed in the ensuing fire, as well as one of his subordinate officers, and the rest of the cavalry was forced to gallop to cover. The historic battle between the Polish cavalrymen and German heavy artillery came to be known as the Charge at Kroyanta, and it's lived on as an exaggerated myth in a number of propaganda campaigns. Due to a critical lapse in communication, the events of the day were falsely reported by Italian journalists as having included a direct cavalry charge from the Polish against German tanks. While this interpretation was based on gruesome photographs of the aftermath, the image of riders with lances and swords facing down invaders with far greater military capabilities was embedded in the collective consciousness of the modern world. Nazi Germany used this mythological visualization of the Charge at Kroyanta to boast about how advanced their weaponry was, as well as to imply they had more tanks to utilize against their enemies than they truly did. Soviet propaganda took this a step further, implying that Poland had sent many members of their cavalry to die out of complete ignorance. In the constructed Soviet view of the events, Polish military leadership was reckless and unwilling to modernize their army. This piece of propaganda was taught in many schools up until the 1990s, leading to many people growing up thinking the Polish army was fundamentally weak and unwilling to modernize. Of course, this is just a piece of propaganda. Even in the year 1939, Poland was already developing its own motorized battalions and was implementing anti-tank artillery within its armed forces. Though still considerably less powerful than the great powers at the time, Poland was nowhere near as ignorant of the advances in warfare as either Nazi or Soviet narratives implied. Even so, history is written by the victors, and the myth of the Charge at Kroyanta stuck, especially as Poland struggled to keep up with the rest of its allies during World War II. But times are changing, and Poland's taken it upon itself to disprove this lasting myth. The once downtrodden republic has come a long way from its prior crushing defeats, which ironically might have been the key factor in galvanizing Poland toward efficient self-defense. Poland is quickly becoming Europe's underdog military powerhouse, but before you find out how, you need to find out why. The Charge at Kroyanta was only the beginning of Poland's struggles during the Second World War, as the fighting both within and beyond the borders brought many Poles to the front lines. Domestically, the German occupation was opposed by an expansive resistance network that provided 43% of all reports to British intelligence coming from Central Europe. Abroad, Polish troops were the fourth largest demographic among soldiers across European fronts. Even as an underground state, Poland was already making itself an instrumental part of the Allied war effort. Though liberating Europe from the Nazis was the goal, Poland had a responsibility to itself as well. It resented the possibility that its territory could remain occupied after the war by an opportunistic foreign power. These fears were confirmed when their own government in exile was given no sway over the proceedings at the Yalta Conference. The communist dictator Joseph Stalin made a power grab that forced Poland to capitulate to the whims of the Soviet state. Under the guise of allowing Poland to retain national sovereignty, elections were rigged, and the mechanisms of governance were used deceptively to promote a pro-Soviet and pro-communist policy plan. With the rest of Poland's European allies having effectively turned their back on the occupied nation, the Polish people were stuck contending with Stalin's depression. This sudden betrayal would linger in the minds of future generations to come. Once again, Poland's sense of national identity was resilient in the face of outside authoritarianism. Many of the same resistance organizations that were active during German occupation had grown into political movements that stood in opposition to communist rule. These included the Freedom and Independence Association, as well as the Polish Home Army, or Armia Krajowa. The most powerful force in overcoming communism was the trade unions, which brought about social justice and workers' rights on a level that Stalinist communism was incapable of offering. This united movement of solidarity allowed Poland to take power back into the hands of its people, and with support from the United States as well as the Catholic Church, succeeded in a non-violent revolution that stamped out all remaining elements of communism by the 1990s. Having overcome two different authoritarian regimes that sought to exploit the common people with lofty promises, Poland under Solidarity was, for a brief moment in time, positioned uniquely as a country that could realistically achieve the supposed aims of both fascism and communism without the corruption and deception common in real-life examples of both ideologies. This unique situation would not last, however, as the onset of liberal capitalism throughout the 1990s cooled Poland into becoming less of a radical powder keg. But even while Poland comfortably faded into the background of global politics, there was one value that remained as an overriding principle for its future endeavors. That value is the importance of self-sufficiency. This is how we've arrived at a current moment where Poland has shored up its defenses to the point of eclipsing several of its neighbors in raw firepower, being situated in the center of a region that has for decades been threatened by war. Poland stands to gain a lot by making itself the dominant military force in Eastern Central Europe. In terms of raw personnel, Poland currently has a slightly smaller army than its former adversary, Germany. But Minister of Defense Mariusz Błaszczak has announced plans to swell those numbers to a total of 300,000 by 2035, which would officially put Poland head and shoulders above any mainland European nation army, with the exception of Russia. Poland's growing dominance in the region will likely grow as Germany continues to be reluctant to fully remilitarize in accordance with its own Morgenthau Plan following World War II. Poland's geographical proximity to the Baltic states will also make them the most reliable defender of the vulnerable NATO members. This would put it on almost even footing with France as NATO's primary or secondary European power, eclipsing the once prominent United Kingdom. So what exactly are Poland's plans? And will they really turn a historical underdog into a rising great power? Even without the sheer numbers promised by the new recruitment plan, Poland's land forces are already formidable. Poland possesses a much greater number of tanks and howitzers than most of its neighbors and is on track to have more than Germany, Italy, and France combined. These heavy metal weapons are primarily of American and South Korean make and have the top-notch specs to match. Military trade deals such as these free Poland up from relying on outdated Russian weaponry, which, as can be seen in Russia's catastrophic loss of tanks in Ukraine, have been shown to have some rather severe design flaws. As part of this effort to modernize, Poland has steadily been replacing Russian-made tanks with state-of-the-art M1 Abrams, an American tank that boasts both extreme mobility and highly durable armor. The stunning reputation of the Abrams as a battle tank cannot be understated, and the United States has used this tank to great effect in its own foreign skirmishes. The use of depleted uranium in the armor makes the M1 Abrams highly resistant to both ballistics and explosives, and very few that have been deployed have ever been critically damaged. Among those Abrams tanks that were downed, several were taken out by friendly fire from the anti-tank weaponry of other Abrams units. With a 1,500 horsepower turbine that can maneuver the tank across all manner of difficult terrain, the Abrams is able to run down opposing tanks and destroy them at close range. And with two high-caliber machine guns, in addition to the main cannon, the tank has more than enough firepower to do just that. Compared to a Russian T-72, which is a considerably lighter tank that has a maximum speed of 37 miles per hour, the M1 Abrams can travel 45 miles per hour while still carrying the weight of its heavy armor. The most revolutionary feature of the M1 Abrams by far is its onboard communication systems, which include blue force tracking and infrared sights to enhance visibility and cooperation with friendly units on the battlefield. These tools help with heightened battlefield awareness, making the Abrams a combat vehicle that reaps great rewards when it's piloted by a significantly competent and well-trained four-person team. Apart from the Abrams, Poland's acquired a large supply of K2 Black Panther tanks from South Korea and has announced plans to open a factory that will construct them domestically. Dubbed the most expensive tank in the world, the K2 was developed as a modification of the standard M1 Abrams into a sleeker and smaller battle tank with even greater mobility options. Its ability to ford across medium-depth bodies of water through hydro-pneumatic suspension is unmatched by any armored vehicle in history. Additionally, the K2 Black Panther boasts unique weapon systems that surpass the Abrams in tank-to-tank combat, most notably the Korean Smart Top Attack Munition, or K-STAM, fired by the cannon. The K-STAM is guided through smart munitions technology to seek out the weakest parts of enemy tanks and is a recent innovation of the South Korean military technology. While the overall similarities in appearance to K2 Panthers and M1 Abrams have given it a second nickname, the Baby Abrams, due to its smaller size, taking the South Korean tank lightly would be a grave mistake. The hefty price tag on the 1,000 K2 Black Panthers Poland's purchased is especially daunting, but given that it's the most powerful pound-for-pound tank on the market, the price tag is justified. Poland will be the first nation in both the European Union and NATO to utilize these marvels of South Korean engineering outside of their native country, and by producing them domestically, the Republic might even have the power to develop its own cheaper but comparably effective variation. But there are other strategic purchases that Poland's made to improve both its ground and anti-air capabilities, such as the 500 HIMARS rocket launchers, which were acquired from the US for $10 billion. The HIMARS, or High Mobility Artillery Rocket Systems, have proved indispensable for Ukraine for their ability to penetrate through Russian anti-missile defenses and are likely to become a staple of NATO's military arsenal in future conflicts. Poland's own missile defense system has been improved by a $4.75 billion order of Patriot missiles from the United States. Not to neglect aerial combat, Poland is also looking to buy an array of helicopters and drones from America or whatever other ally will provide such equipment. 48 Fa-50 light attack aircraft have also been purchased from South Korea to diversify the speed and mobility of Poland's air support. The mustering of all these impressive pieces of military hardware could lead to the fulfillment of Poland's promise to itself and its allies, becoming the strongest military power on land in Central and Eastern Europe. The United States military understands the key importance of Poland's location and agreed to allow their 5th Army Corps to reside permanently within the country. Poland, developing more potent land forces, is the most sensible option for its own defense, as well as giving the Republic a distinctly advantageous position as the eastern bulwark of NATO. The ease with which Poland can roll out the heavy artillery in mainland Europe is especially relevant because of the ongoing imperialist actions of Russia. The conflict in Ukraine is only the most recent example of Russian aggression, and given that Poland shares a border with Ukraine, there's a lot of justification for Poland to be concerned about its own protection. Russian military command has all but signaled direct hostility toward Poland with inflammatory and dehumanizing statements, such as those made by Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council. I see no point in maintaining diplomatic relations with Poland. This state must not exist for us while there is no one but Russophobes in power, and Ukraine is full of Polish mercenaries who should be ruthlessly exterminated like stinky rats. Further remarks from the Kremlin indicate a desire to denazify Poland in a blatant attempt to justify the possibility of another annexation effort. In the process, Russia's also removed memorials that honored Polish people killed at the hands of Soviet soldiers in the past, a callous and ahistorical attempt at downplaying their country's own brutal past. Threats of nuclear brinksmanship in the form of stationing missiles on Poland's eastern border have also raised concerns about how far Russia is willing to go. This open hostility toward Poland from the Russian government is distressing, but sadly it's not unfamiliar. Just like in the years leading up to World War II, an expansionist dictator with a mind for empire building is threatening to conquer much of Europe. And in this case, it's not Germany, but the other country that Poland has a troubled history with. But it's not just invading forces like Russia that history's made Poland wary of. The German invasion and the Soviet occupation both share one common factor. When Poland was in need, the other Allied superpowers did not readily give them the help they requested. On a national level, the push for self-sufficiency is not simply a philosophical preference for growing stronger, it's also a bitter acknowledgement that the nation may have nobody else to rely on. On 2022's Polish Independence Day, the country's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki said, "The Polish army must be so powerful that it does not have to fight due to its strength alone." The silver lining to this current moment is that the world is much more aware of and engaged in the project of stopping Russia from carrying on its war in Ukraine. The United States has shown itself to be a stalwart ally of Ukraine in regards to sending weapons and denouncing Russia's actions, and the emphasis on foreign policy under the administration of President Biden could set a precedent that extends to Poland in the case of the worst. The former Deputy Assistant Secretary General of NATO, Dr. Shea, had this to say in regards to Poland's militarization. "What Poland is doing is very welcome, but it won't make sense going at it alone." This statement could be seen as an indication that NATO has no intention of underserving Poland in any upcoming skirmish, but skepticism remains among Polish leadership as larger and more concrete promises have been made and broken before. Yet Morawiecki has not signaled any lack of trust in his allies and disagreed with former President Emmanuel Macron of France over whether the goal of European autonomy from the United States is a worthwhile one. While visiting Washington, the Prime Minister made clear his intention to seek a closer bond between Poland and the US, stating that if countries west of Poland do not understand why such an alliance is necessary, it was probably due to historical circumstances. Poland is trying to maintain the most common-sense policy based on a close alliance with the United States within the framework of the European Union, and this is the best path for Poland. Though the fighting in Ukraine is far from over, and Poland has not officially entered the war, being prepared for a ground invasion from Russia is worth the cost in their eyes. Poland cannot allow itself to suffer a modern equivalent to the Charge at Kroyanta, not in sensationalized mythology or cold hard reality. And furthermore, it might not be able to afford to wait for distant allies in the event of a Russian attack, or rely on the goodwill of other world powers in case of a challenge to its sovereignty. In order to be NATO's first line of defense against Russia, Poland has chosen to spend 3% of its GDP on defense, the highest allocation of defense budget in the region. Greece is the second highest in Europe, with 2.8% of its GDP going to defense, and its pockets for foreign weapons are not as deep. At least not as deep as Poland is willing to go in order to face down the profound threat of Putin's Russia. To quote Polish General Rajmund Andrzejczak in a recent press conference, "We just took our suitcases with money and we're going like hell around the world trying to buy. It's not a matter of money. I've got money. I've got big money." The aforementioned tanks and rocket launchers are only the beginning, but as for where the economic wealth to pay for the surge of military might come from, the answers are surprisingly simple. The diaspora of Polish tradespeople who emigrated to other countries over the past century has begun to return to the country with much higher net worths for themselves and their families. The capitalist success of Poles overseas in the United States of America, as well as throughout several regions of Europe, has directly caused wealth to flow back to the homeland. Wealth that can now be used to reinvest in a future without the threat of being bowled over by a mightier power. Whether the GDP of Poland can truly bear the weight of this costly investment remains to be seen, but the success story has a sensational appeal to it. This emphasis on the achievements of talented workers who are loyal to and enrich their nation is in some way a modern reflection of the values of solidarity. But if all these indications are correct, nonviolence may not be the direction in which the country goes. With all this military spending in the name of maintaining stability and self-sufficiency, Poland runs the risk of accelerating tensions and creating a deepened climate of hostility. The newfound focus on expanding the defense budget could be exactly what the right-wing Law and Justice Party is looking for to maintain power and approval, and what would begin as a justified emphasis on national security could grow into a warmongering rhetoric if left unchecked. Robert Chulda, a military expert from the Casimir Pulaski Foundation, is not so convinced of the practicality of the plan nor impressed by the appeals to the collective. He states, "It seems highly likely that such a large scale of planned orders is largely driven by a political populism aimed at gaining popularity here and now, rather than to be a real, comprehensive, and well-thought-out plan for harmoniously strengthening the armed forces." On the other hand, historical precedent has shown us that appeasement is ineffective when it comes to totalitarians like Putin, and show of force might be the only viable solution to the mounting problem of Russian imperialism. Whether it's a ploy for re-election or not, the fact of the matter is that the economic risk is a less devastating one than the risk of Poland being subject to one more occupation by an autocracy. Should these ambitious goals be completed within their time frame, Poland is all but guaranteed to become a military power that can serve as NATO's backbone within the region. Now check out What If China Attacked Russia, or click this other video instead.